All right, YouTube, today we're talking about Rockwells, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the heavy. So let's go. Here is your traditional 2.5 ton Rockwell. Most people are running these in their buggies, their bouncers, their crawlers, a million other things. We're gonna go over the weak points first, so let's dive into it. All right, the biggest weak point on a Rockwell is the 16 spline stock shafts. I have broken probably 12 this year alone. Actually, maybe even more counting the beginning of the spring. So these things break constantly. People snap the U-joints, people snap the outers, people snap the inners. They break all the time. If I had to recommend, I would recommend upgrading to a chromoly shaft. Another big weak point on the Rockwells are your stock knuckles. People break the knuckles all the time. A lot of people break them at the caster point to where the arm comes out. This thin wall part of the housing that goes around, it's really only about a little bit thicker than 3/8 of an inch, and it is cast. So bingo, they snap like that. You can buy aftermarket upgraded ones from Rockwell Off-Road or Beyond Precise Performance, and you can find a bunch of different ones of those. You can get upgraded third member parts too, like the carriers for your bearing suppression, for where your shims and whatnot go, but you don't need those as much as the knuckles. Going back to spot number 2, another weak point is the C-hub. People have snapped these. They're not nearly as common as the knuckles, but I have seen these snap before. They do snap if you take a really gnarly hard hit. All right, even though the axle shafts are the most common part that break, these are without a doubt the thing that you should always be checking. Your ring and pinion, okay? Basically, the ring and pinion have a backlash. There are shims that go on this side that suppress the inner bearing that goes to the bowl gear, or there are also shims that go to the outside of each end of the pinion output. And those basically tighten up the bearing tolerances to keep the, well, you could technically call it the mesh or the deflection within the pinion gear. I'll show that now. So on this one's just a fresh rebuilt one. So there's really no deflection, there's no in and out play. And in this one, I haven't gone through it yet, so it's still really loose. You can kind of hear it in there, and this walks in and out like that. So no bueno. Oftentimes people don't remember that with the 672 gear ratio on a Rockwell, this pinion is spinning about 5 times faster than your standard 14 bolt or Dana 80, maybe even a little bit faster. I'm not too sure on those numbers, but basically it's spinning a lot faster. So if you have a drive shaft that's out of line, or maybe something within the brake rotors messed up, 95% of Rockwells are running pinion brakes. I'll dive into that now. All right, these are your pinion brakes. You guys are probably familiar with these. These go on either outside of the pinion or either output of the pinion. There are wheel bearing brakes, but they're not as common. So those are the options for brakes, or some people run transfer case brakes. But anyways, going back to the pinion, with how fast it's moving from the drive shaft, if your drive shaft's out of line, or if you have a warped rotor or a warped mount to your brake rotor, and that is always going through these bearings when they're rotating, it's gonna take out the bearings. I probably taken out 3 bearings, specifically the pinion bearings on Rockwells alone. On these axles specifically, it doesn't always have to be the drive shaft. You could break a brake rotor and have it rotate out of line, or you could snap some sort of something with inside the axle shaft, and that could cause deflection all the way up to the pinion and snap them. They are common to break. I've met a bunch of people that have broken them themselves, so always check your bearing tolerances. That's really easy to do, and also you can remove your shims. If they are loose, you can remove 1 shim or 2 shims depending on the play. There is a manual from Rockwell, the original builders. If you go look at the old school stuff from the military days when they had a lot of the diagrams and whatnot displaying how the tolerances work, it's honestly magic. I don't know how they designed it back then, but I like to take out a shim every so often to make sure that it's still tightening up. Most guys don't run shims and they just slam them straight in as tight as they can go, and they're fine. Sometimes it doesn't go that good, sometimes you don't get lucky, but just make sure you're always checking that. All right, and this is the final weak point of Rockwells, and to me, it's the biggest weak point out of them all. Your bulkhead bolts. Okay, so this is your bulkhead, your third member, your center section, whatever you want to call it. And these bolts are notorious for coming loose, stripping out, breaking off, the studs break, you name it, they break. Always check those. A lot of guys I know, especially in the mud truck industry, they'll put a tack weld here, a tack weld here, and a tack weld on the other side. And basically what that does is it allows the bulkhead to stay in place no matter what, even if a bolt comes loose. If you ever need to replace the bulkhead or replace a bearing or gears or put in a locker or a spool or whatever, you can just cut the tack welds. I think that's a smart idea to do, because if your bolts come loose that hold on your bulkhead, like I had happen this summer, and you don't catch it, they'll strip out the housing, and then you got to weld in the housing, redo that, or put on a new top plate. It's a whole entire can of worms. It's a lot of work to do and to go through and to do it right. So just double check that. So that's my final thing on the bads of the Rockwells. Now we're gonna talk about the goods in the Rockwells. These are called a mohawked diff cover, okay? Basically, it's the diff cover of a Rockwell. They do not have a traditional Dana 80 or Sterling style 14 bolt Dana 60 style diff cover. The diff cover is essentially on the bottom because the bulkhead goes on the top. The best thing about the Mohawks is the Mohawks have more clearance than any traditional off-road style axle. Spider 9s, Dana 80, 14 bolt Sterling axles, your standard 60s, or your Dana 44s even. These things are always gonna have more clearance. You're gonna see hybrids. A lot from the old days, people will take a Rockwell center section and run Super Duty 60 outers, or maybe they'll run just a standard normal style Super Kingpin outer like that Crane Magnum offers. But that's another pro of the Rockwell. The standard Rockwells that you get them stock have a massive cup that comes down like on those other axles, and that'll get caught up on everything. But if you Mohawk them, it's amazing. Another great thing about the Rockwell is the high pinion. As you can see, there is not an extrusion coming out of here that's gonna get hit on every damn thing on the trail. The pinion's really high up. You got your link, basically, if you were to count your separation here for draw a line from bottom to bottom, a rock would have to be about 8 inches above that just to start hitting the drive shaft. It's really a good way to go. You have great line to your transfer case, and they're really easy to set up. Another thing about the Rockwells is you do not have to run an all spline style drive shaft to have lots of drive shaft play. The drive shafts are really easy to be set up because of the fact that the high pinion is so centered where it is. Now, with good, there's bad, and Rockwells have this problem too, up travel. Now, this is really a double-edged sword because some builders are stupid and they don't know how to build around Rockwells, and other builders are smart and they do know how to make the up travel work. Basically, up travel is the amount of suspension that allows your axle to move towards the chassis or into the chassis. Here it is. Basically, the bulkhead can interfere with anything in the chassis referring to up travel. So then again, up travel is the measurement referring to how far your axle moves upwards towards the chassis. As you see on this one, the top of the bulkhead hits the radiator, or well, it did before it got smashed in. But if you're a bad builder and you don't know how to build around the bulkhead, then it's easy to complain about. But most people are too uneducated or don't care enough to spend the amount of time to actually go in and figuring out the science behind it. Look at this truck, for instance. This truck has an insane amount of down travel. Down travel is referring to the measurement that the axle moves away from the chassis or moves down in, standard earth-related terms. This truck has a lot of it because the truck was not built specifically for Rockwells to have it move into the chassis, or at least that's my assumption. Moving on to this chassis, a lot of the things that I got when I was building it was, hey, you're building it too tall. But with Rockwells, it's okay to move your frame rails up into the chassis. This allows for clearance on the Rockwells when they're moving out through their standard suspension cycle. Okay guys, well that's pretty much the goods and the bads on Rockwells. There are more, and I do have one final one that I'd like to bring up previously before the video is over. And that is the spindle. Basically, the spindle bolts on the outside of the knuckle, and it's what the wheel hub or wheel bearings also attach to. Basically, they go right here. You see this is your wheel bearing. These things take a beating, but they're not as strong as they may seem. These things go out of play all the time. They snap easy. I see spindles snap probably once a year on somebody's buggy. Whether or not it's from them not checking how tight their wheel bearing lug nuts are or the nuts that go on the side of the spindle, it's still a relation to the weak point on the Rockwell. These should have been designed better. They were made as a 2.5 ton Rockwell, referring to the amount of weight that the axle can carry under a spring load, but they're not exactly strong in that sense either. Rock bouncing has a lot of up and down travel with how much the suspension is compressing the weight from the chassis into the axle, and the wheel bearings don't take it that great. There are aftermarket manufacturers that do have some sort of different hub styles that you can go with. For instance, Oversun makes a Super 8 hub, which allows you to go to a 6-on-5 wheel, which is really great. But in theory, it's not worth the $4,000 when you can replace a wheel bearing once a year for about $60 for all 4 corners. So that's my final complaint, but it is another thing that is a weak point on the Rockwell. Okay, secret, I forgot to tell you guys this. But seriously, wheels are a big problem too. I completely forgot to bring this up. I don't know why I didn't bring this up earlier in the video. Basically, wheels are a down point. With a Rockwell style hub, the stock style hub that comes on the standard Rockwells if you were to buy them from a military distributor, have a standard 6-lug style wheel. They're massive, they're chunky, they're annoying to work with, and it leaves you really down to 2 options. Either A, you can get a steel wheel like this, which is a standard 16.5 Hummer beadlock, or B, you can go to an 8-on-6.5 stud or wheel hub by Oversun. It's an 8-on-6.5. It's called the Super 8. It's aluminum hub, and they're about $700 to $800 a corner. So you're spending big money. But that does allow you to run a 17-inch style wheel, which allows you to fit in with the rest of the 1-ton style buggies. So basically, you're trapped down to a 16.5 style wheel, or you can get an 8-on-6.5 stud / wheel hub, and that allowed you to go to a 17-inch style wheel. So it's really a pick your poison route. Do you want to save the weight and spend the money, or do you want to save the money and gain the weight with steel wheels? But there's really not that many bad downsides to the wheels other than that they're heavy. And if you ever did get a flat and you didn't have a spare, it's not like you can go to your buddy who has a 17-inch style 8-on-6.5 Vision wheel, Dirty Life, Raceline, beadlock that you can just trade and go through. So you are limited there. It's not the end of the world. A lot of people hate it or dislike it. They like to really hate on that fact of the Rockwell. But honestly, if you know what you're doing and if you can afford the spares or get a second set of wheels or just a 5th tire for a spare, it's not that bad. People often complain about these things on the Rockwells because they're uneducated and don't want to spend the extra money. Even though if you were to go to a 1-ton style wheel or a 1-ton style axle like a 14 bolt or Dana 60, you would still need a 5th spare, just like a standard 17-inch style wheel or 43 sticky. But the nice thing about having a 1-ton style axle is if you do have an 8-on-6.5, with how much more common they are in off-roading in general, it is much more likely that if you were to break down in a park with a flat tire or a broken wheel, you can find somebody else that has a very similar to setup to you that may let you borrow it for the weekend so you can continue trail riding. Now, there are companies that make 2-inch axle shafts. You can upgrade from the 16-spline axle shaft to a 2-inch axle shaft. I'll leave some links in the description for them as well. Basically, there are 2 main options, and these are the 2 options. You can either go with Oversun, which creates a 2-inch U-joint style axle shaft. It's called the Violator. It comes with an inner and outer shaft along with a spool and drive flange. And then on top of that, you will also have to drill out your spindle to allow the 2-inch axle to clear and then run brass slugs. However, there is another option, which is a better option overall, considering the reputation that Oversun has acquired over the past few years, and that is RCV. You can run RCV's 2-inch Big Bell shaft. It's a 47-spline inner and outer shaft, which allows you to run RCV's spool and drive flange. However, these are about $6,000 for the axle shafts alone compared to the $4,000 price tag of Oversun's, but you do get a lifetime warranty along with a long wait time. Sometimes RCV's lead times are upwards of 6 months to a year. I know people waiting longer. Well, guys, that is the final end of this video. I tried my best to describe everything. Really, when it comes down to it, Rockwells are a great axle. They're bulletproof for the most part. If you spend a little bit of money here or there and you're not jumping it off the roof of your house, you're probably going to be fine. Rockwells gained a bad reputation from people that are uneducated and just like to shit on them for no reason. Rockwells are a great axle. They're affordable. They are the cheapest way to build a no-lift axle, and they do help with your center of gravity and weight distribution. If you have really heavy lower axles, heavy quote unquote, By the way, a truss Dana 80 or 14 bolt is within 50 pounds of a steering Rockwell anyways. So the whole entire weight problem that everybody talked about with Rockwells being so heavy, it's pretty much irrelevant, and the topic has become obsolete. It's really not true. Rockwells are not as heavy as everybody makes them claim. And if they are that heavy, then why would everybody be running them if they could just run a truss Dana 80 or 14 bolt? By the time you have a 2-inch ram on there, full trussed out with Magnum season knuckles, it's the same weight, all of 800 pounds. But anyways, that's besides the topic. Hopefully you guys found the video interesting. If you have any questions, I'll respond to them in the comments. And like I said, find your Rockwells anywhere you want. Most of the time you can get them from junkyards or military distributors. There are a couple different companies within the northern US or the southern US by Texas, or sometimes in Tennessee, upwards of like Washington or South Dakota, North Dakota, you can find distributors. Anyways, thanks guys. Hope this was interesting. Peace. Okay, this is the last thing I forgot to bring up. I'm really good at forgetting things. The other downside or upside of a Rockwell is the steering ram. Often most people run a 2-ended or double-ended steering ram, such as a PSC or surplus center steering ram. Now, single-ended rams are also very popular, but they're not as common because they are mildly harder to set up, and it's more affordable to just do a 2-inch ram by the time you're down the road. It's easier to get your 7/8 heim joints and your upper steering arms or high steer arms from your Rockwell distributors. You can get high steer arms that bolt straight on top of the knuckle, which are, in theory, stronger, but not always. Oftentimes, it's good to run a support from the main shaft that comes off of the Rockwell knuckle as stock. So if I was choosing, I'd probably do a double-ended ram. It is more stronger and it is easier to set up, but the single-ended ram is more affordable and it is in the same vicinity of strength as long as you're not ramming it off of Rockwells. So anyways, that's the last one I got. Peace, finally. Okay, there might be one more. There is a downside to 4-link. 4-link is kind of hard to set up. Most people run it off the top of the bulkhead with a bolt-on plate, or some people just run it to the sides like these axles have. So, okay, Rockwells are not bad. I just keep on finding stuff that's kind of not really bad. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Anyways, peace.